Welcome, everybody, to Talk with Claude. I'm Claude, your host. I'm sitting here with Danielle Kraemer, who, hi, Danielle, who's going to share her experience of having come down with COVID and had symptoms. And I've got a few questions for her. But the first thing I'd like to do is just get a little bit of background on you, Danielle, if you can help us relate to who you are in life and you know, get a general sense of what your situation is generally, not necessarily, and then we'll take it into the COVID situation here. So maybe just let us know where you're from and what brought you out here and when you got to our little town of Revelstoke.
Yeah, so I'm from Chilliwack, BC. That's where all my family is. So just living there for my whole life, and then I moved to Whistler when I was 19. Had the time of my life, and then met my boyfriend. Moved to Golden. Had a little bit more of a settled life. Got a dog, and then to Revelstoke. So Revelstoke brought us in just because of the backyard that we have, all of our recreations, and mostly snowboarding, which yeah, I've been doing that for like 11 or 12 years. So that is why I'm in Revelstoke. I moved here in April 2017. And then I've been in the same house the whole time, which is pretty rare for somebody my age to move to Revelstoke, thankfully.
So you mentioned your age there. So you started your travels when you were 19. Where are we at now?
I'm 26 now.
26, right on.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So just following my passion in snowboarding and the outdoors, pretty much knowing that Chilliwack wasn't exactly for me at that time.
right. So, and you were in some pretty interesting towns there. What landed you? Are you thinking maybe Revelstoke's your final destination, or
I hope
how do we
so.
stack up?
Yeah, no, I definitely hope I can stay in Revelstoke for a while. Like I said, I do have a dog, so I know eventually my landlord will want to sell his house. He thinks maybe the economy might crash, so he was hoping to maybe sell it this spring. And with a dog, it's pretty hard to find a place in Revelstoke. So, I mean, fingers crossed, and hopefully I make connections with enough people that they can let me know if anything comes available. But yeah, given jobs and the opportunity to stay here, I would stay here for a long time.
Well, that's good to know, and it's very unfortunate. In fact, being a landlord myself, my first reaction when things started coming down with the COVID situation, was it in March-ish? I thought things would crash, and I thought I'd be possibly, losing my tenants or whatnot. But it turns out that a lot of people are moving from big cities into small towns like ours because they're working from home now, and they're like, well, why should I endure the big city when I can be in a great place like this? So it's made a tough dynamic of renters trying to find places to live even worse, unfortunately. And I've got friends of mine that actually sold their house just when things were coming down because they had made a plan to try to sell high and save whatever money they could to deal with whatever fallout might happen. And unfortunately, they've nearly been left out of town. They've almost had to leave town. They found something at the last minute, but it's never been this bad. So that's definitely an extra strain on people out here. And
Definitely, yeah.
very
And it's
unfortunate.
it's worrisome knowing that there's people that are working from home who are making a lot more money than people like myself who are serving or doing the frontline kind of work. So it scares me to know that someone can afford a $2,000 rent when I know I can't. So
Yeah, no, definitely. And these big shifts, sometimes they're hard to avoid, but at the same time, things shift so fast that it's so hard to adapt to this new reality, right? And given enough time, I think given enough time and freedom, I think people would find ways to make things work. But when it happens suddenly, and then there's a whole bunch of restrictions put on top of that because of our unique situation, um, yeah, no, it can be very tough. And also working in the service industry under the situation. I want to get more into COVID later, but you know, compared to somebody who's working from home, you're always at a moment's notice of finding out that wherever you're working is closing, right? So
Totally. Yeah.
yeah. So how's that? I mean, for you, having had to be in isolation now, how does that affect your revenue? Do you have any compensation for being in that special situation, or are you just like, well, just too bad you're missing 2 weeks of work?
Well, thankfully, my employer has been helping me through this, so that's really nice. I'm still on the phone or on my computer answering emails, writing schedules, so I'm still kind of working from home. And then my employer is helping me because of that, so that is really good. But for all of my staff, because I'm a manager, all of my staff who've had to have this time off, I've been trying to tell them to look for revenue, look for financial help from CRA or to try and help them out.
Right. And sorry, where were you working when all this came down?
I was working at La Baguette.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they were closed for a while and then they reopened and then they had some exposure cases and then closed down again, right?
They didn't close for the first time, but they just recently closed because of all the exposure that they had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's tough. I mean, people think, oh, well, you know, employers should just keep paying their staff even though they're not working, but it's not. Anybody who's owned a business knows it's not how it works, right? If you're not,
Yeah,
if your business is closed and there's no money coming in, you're pretty limited.
exactly.
You don't have this endless source of money you can just dish out because, you know, people were nice and stuff like that. And your heart breaks probably because you'd want to help them out because you know the terrible situation they're in. But in fact, as a business owner, very often you're not in any better situation than your employees. You know,
Right.
I see that a lot being a landlord as well. People, you know, will jump out to blame the greedy landlords because they happen to own a house, but they also have to pay a mortgage. And if they don't have money coming in because of their situation, then there's, you know, they can have a few months stored in there, but it goes quick in this town. Things are expensive for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah, and especially just for landlords like yourself, just with the taxes that you have to pay as well. Like I think they just went up recently, right?
Yeah.
Or yeah, so
Yeah.
it definitely makes it hard. And I've seen those posts and people talking about the greedy landlords, but definitely understanding where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, just to put things into perspective, when we built the place here, right? It was a forest on the lot that I bought in 2004, and things were cheap back then for sure. And you know, we when I got my start and I started venturing out west, I came out from Quebec and I lived out of a van with my wife, my wife to be at the time, and so we didn't, you know, we didn't necessarily have any more than anybody else, but we saved up a little bit. We bought the lot. The timing was probably better than it could be for youth right now, that's for sure, and I recognize that. But at the same time, when we first got here, I think we were paying something like $89 a year for water, and I forget what my last bill was, but it's upwards of 800, like, and that's
Oh
in a
wow.
span of 10 years, right? So that's, you know, you can only absorb so much increase. You know, you can plan a little bit ahead, but every time you get ahead, things increase and then you're back one step. And it's not like my personal salary is increased to the same fold, right? So
Yeah,
I know a lot of people that might look like they're doing really well, but a lot of people are just keeping their head above water right now. So I think that
absolutely.
needs to be said. Um, so what's your living arrangement like now? You said you've been in the same place for a few years. Are you with roommates or just you and your boyfriend or?
So we're a total of five in the house. So I have three other roommates and then my boyfriend and myself and our dog. Um, so my three roommates have been living here now for a couple months. One of them has been living here for almost 2 years with us. But but yeah, the roommates are always changing kind of like every 6 months to a year.
Right. And how does your situation affect them? Like did they have to get tested as well then? And you know, if their test comes back negative, then you're still living in the same house and you basically are stuck in your room for 2 weeks, or what does that look like?
It's a good question, and I'm getting text messages right now from people that I know who have tested positive, and they're asking me the exact same thing. Obviously, I'm not a doctor or a nurse, but this is just the answers that I've gathered. And to keep your sanity, the answers that I have. So, pretty much what happened is when I tested positive, everyone booked a test. Um, Even if they weren't really showing symptoms. Some of my roommates, I think, maybe thought they were sick, so they tend to show symptoms even though they weren't. My boyfriend, he wasn't feeling really any symptoms at all, and so they all went to get their test, came back, and then for the next couple of days, everyone was pretty nervous. But I guess my boyfriend had like a little bit of like a sore throat and like a something in there, but same with my other roommates. And his test came back positive, but everyone else came back negative. So then the next conversation for everyone was now what? So we all called the health line trying to figure out what are we going to do. They said to do 14 days for the people that were negative from the last time they were in contact with me. And that for a couple of days was very confusing because when was the last time you were in contact? Does that mean the last time I walked outside of my room? Or does that mean the last time they were within 3 feet away for 15 minutes or whatever? So, and then a couple of days of that, trying to figure that out. I was in my room for the first 4 days because I had no energy to leave my bed. But then after that, I became kind of antsy, wanted to socialize a little bit, but of course, had a mask on outside, sanitized hands or gloves, and kept like a great distance away from everyone. Um, After I called nurses trying to just get the real information because of every time I come out of my room, they have to do an extra 14 days. That can turn up to be a month and a half, like so, or it can just never end until I'm done. So what the nurse told me is that it's 14 days from the time you're in close contact, which means the time that I had no mask on and was with them. So that would have been at the very start of my isolation. So they only have 4 more days extra than I do.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And would you say, I mean, I'm looking at your living arrangement. I mean, that's pretty typical for Revelstoke as far as I know, right?
Yeah.
So would you say that our special Revelstoke living arrangements, which is typical, adds definitely an extra challenge as far as not spreading COVID and maybe also dealing with the repercussions? How, yeah, how do you feel that affects? Because I mean, I've seen a lot of people blame this group or that group for the reason why COVID is spreading, right? But when I look at the living arrangements, I'm like, wow, maybe we don't need to point fingers at special groups. The whole town, so many people are being forced to live, so many roommates together because that's our reality here. So I don't think I've heard anybody talk about that, but it seems pretty obvious from what you're describing.
Yeah. There's definitely something about that. And I think that is kind of what a little bit, it kind of hurt me when I saw the news going on about Revelstoke being blamed for social gatherings and that we're just being irresponsible. That's what I took from it. And I didn't find that was typically true. Like, of course, there's people everywhere that are not doing their part and they're doing social gatherings and everything else. But for the most part, I think that we have to work jobs that are frontline jobs to be able to afford to live here. So we're working for tourism, which is already a bit scary. And then we live with people that also work jobs that are frontline and tourist jobs. So your bubble can't be that small when you're doing that. Because Revelstoke is a community where people live in groups to be able to afford high housing costs. So that means working multiple jobs just to survive where it's a tourist destination. Yeah, and I think it's just really easy to blame us for the social activities. Yeah, just I don't think everyone's disregarding what we have to do.
Yeah, and I mean, people might have been living this way for a long time in mountain towns and stuff like that. But I remember growing up, for me, like that would have been about 30 years ago. Um, what I would typically envision for living arrangements, what you're describing, that would be what we'd expect in the third world. As
Yeah,
sad as it is, but it's true. That's not what you aspired to, unless you had very, very special, different aspirations than your average person. So, but that's a reality here. It's not everybody, but we all know, when especially when the ski season comes in, that people are going to pack into rooms, and they're going to come from everywhere around the world. And even though they might have spent 14 days in isolation coming out from Australia or wherever it is, once they get here, they're packed with other people, and there's people moving in and out of town. And you can leave your restaurants open and all that, but without the tourism, I mean, you look at the size of the town here, we wouldn't have the services and the amenities that we have in town here if it wasn't for tourism, right?
exactly. Yeah,
So to hear that people are breaking vehicles, or from with Alberta plates or stuff like that
yeah,
I've heard of, is really disheartening, because you can tell restaurants and the services industry to stay open, but something needs to feed them as well, and you'd want everybody to stay home, and everybody's been told to stay home unless absolutely necessary. But I saw a good post go around. It's like, well, a small business is essential for the person who's the business owner if they want to put food on the table. That's,
right.
you know,
Yeah,
essential
it's
is kind of, yeah, go
a
ahead.
bit of a double edged sword for that one, because
Yeah.
as Revelstoke needs, we need tourists, but we also, it's a little bit worrisome having tourists coming in here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But that's why the precautions are there as well. And, originally, let's not forget that, people were asked to sacrifice for 2 weeks. We're 8 months in now. And I'm sure 2 weeks would have been hard enough for businesses as it was, but 8 months after, and without knowing where the future's taking each business, each employer, each employee, um, it's the unknown too, that people are like, well, now I've got to prepare for whatever comes up next, whatever that might be, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I see that being really hard.
So I've got a few questions that I wrote down specifically to COVID. Maybe we'll go back to your situation in the end, kind of closing up. But so I've got one here, and I was curious because this is getting such a big deal, I think, and it's completely overblown, in my opinion, on social media. But what were your beliefs and attitudes towards the pandemic, and at the start, before you got the disease, and as far as protecting yourself and wearing a mask, and stuff like that, like just your general attitude and beliefs towards that, if you want to share that with us.
Yeah. I think prior to this, I mean, it's always changing. So when 2 weeks ago, when everything started happening, well, 3 weeks ago, when everything started happening, of course, that's when more regulations came in, more mask wearing and hands. But just living in Revelstoke, let's say 4 months ago, that's when everybody had, there was barely any cases. It almost felt like regular life. So it was definitely felt like I was in a bubble without having to realize what was going on around me besides what's seen on the news. So I wasn't exactly being the most cautious at that point. But then taking it back 3 weeks ago, that's when I realized how serious this is and how it's right in my backyard and in my neighborhood. So it definitely scared me a little bit. But when I started finding out more and more people getting cases, that's when uh, it was just time to buckle down and manage my mental state for that.
Right. And yeah, and it's a tough one because we hear all kinds of things. Even in the mainstream, you would hear everything from masks don't work to masks are mandatory. You'd hear, uh, in the alternative media, you'd hear everything from it's a hoax, the virus doesn't even exist, to the virus exists, it was built in a lab to kill us all.
Yeah.
So it's hard for people to know what to do, and it's not surprising that people are taking such different routes, right? So then you have kind of the officialese, okay, well, wear masks indoors, social distance. But even then, there's stuff coming out that the virus isn't really spread through kids. And then there's another scientific study that was the biggest one yet that says that kids are actually key to spreading it, but all the schools are still open, but
Yeah,
the businesses are closed. And so there's things are changing all the time, right? So it's not
exactly.
surprising that people's attitudes are kind of, throwing their hands up in the air and say, like it's kind of beyond me. It feels a bit overwhelming. And
It
so,
is very overwhelming. Yeah,
yeah. And so it comes down to a bit of a personal, I think there's a lot of visual, right? So you're out in public, people are going to wear the masks and all that. But once the doors get closed, how people act is very much a personal choice. And I'm hoping that we're not going to be pushing authorities to start being peeping toms in people's houses and all that, because there's definitely a trade-off between the risk of catching COVID and people's mental health in the long term, and you've been in isolation for what, just under 2 weeks?
no, today is day 9.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah,
Yeah,
just
and
under
I'm
2 weeks.
sure that's been hard enough. So if we're talking months of isolation, like in Europe, I think they had situations that were quite hard. Even healthy people were confined to their homes for the longest time. So um, yeah, that's something I'm hoping that we won't have to deal with here. But there's always hoping then.
Yeah.
So you described a little bit what happened immediately after you tested positive. Just to be clear, you started with having symptoms and then went for a test, or did you go for a test right away when there was some exposure at work? And maybe you can flesh out a little bit of your initial realization that you were going to have to deal with this.
I was told that I had exposure, but when I was told I had exposure, I was home for a couple days for my weekend, and then that's when I started to feel symptoms as well. So that's when I went to go get a test, is because I had developed symptoms away from work. Um, and then just waiting for my test, pretty much not knowing if I have COVID or not, because my symptoms didn't, like, it's really easy to be in denial about what your symptoms are and if they actually could be COVID.
Right. Do you think the fact that you knew you had some exposure um, played a key role in you being extra cautious then? Because I could definitely see, people, having the sniffles or a bit of a headache or feeling a little under the weather and going, it's nothing, because you don't want to be that person, right? You don't want to say, oh,
No,
I've got COVID. Now I'm like this leper walking through town kind of thing, right? But h- how much
exactly.
how much of an impact do you think that had, knowing that you were told that you had exposure during that time? And how worrisome was it knowing that you had exposure and you were possibly coming down with symptoms? I mean, you might have been wondering, how bad is this going to get? Am I going to end up in an ICU, or was that even on the radar for you?
Yeah, that was definitely on the radar until probably a couple days ago, realizing that it's getting better, because that's probably the one of the scariest parts, is knowing that I'm feeling fine, but it could get worse from what I've seen. So just every day checking on my symptoms, checking on if I'm feeling all right, shortness of breath or anything like that, and just going every day by it, because who knows that the next day it could be worse, right? So, but knowing that at my workplace, it gave me more of a kick in the butt to go and get tested, and that this could definitely be COVID,
Okay.
which
And
it was.
so how are you managing right now then? And is there anything you need from the community? And here I'd like to cover any aspects, either, encouragement to food or anything the community could do for you. And how are you managing on a day-to-day basis now that you're 9 days in to your isolation?
Um, Today has been a good day, and like I woke up with a lot of energy and pretty much feeling fine besides not being able to smell or taste. Um, so I would think it's pretty good, but from the community, it has been amazing. I've had so many people reaching out to me, just asking if I can have anything. Luckily, living with the 5 people or 4 people has been quite a blessing. Just because if I'm hungry, I have food ready for me. If I need anything, then we have all the sort resources to get it. So, um, to be honest, you don't really need much when you're in your room every day too. So it's just food and hopefully you have some type of screen or some type of hobby.
Yeah, just hoping the internet doesn't shut off on you, eh?
Yeah, making sure you pay that.
Well, that's good to know. And have you actually accepted anything from the community, from people reaching out, or it's been pretty much all your household that's been managing that?
I haven't. So when it first started, he's one of my best friends, but my landlord, he went and got groceries for us. So we have just been cooking from when it first started and managed just fine with that. So I haven't had to, no one has had to reach out to get more things, which is awesome. It's nice that Cheers Liquor Store delivers for the house too. So that was taken care of for everybody else. But other than that, yeah, we haven't really needed anything from the community, but I've been saying thanks to everyone just for reaching out.
I was going to say, what? You can be friends with your landlord? That's heresy.
I know, that's why I'm still here 4 years
Yeah.
later.
Good for you. I'm glad to hear you get along well with your landlord. I think, yeah, that's important to get to know each other and respect our unique situations. Um, so now looking at the posts that you put up that kind of set you apart because you're part of a handful of people who found out early that you were exposed to COVID and have the symptoms and have had the virus. There's obviously going to be more. So, however, the things you were expressing in that post that kind of made me reach out to you, and you say you had quite a few other news media reach out to you as well. Do you want to just name some of those, and maybe we can even post the links to their um, interviews or whatnot, coverage of your situation in the show notes.
Yeah, so I've had Castanet, which is a broadcaster newspaper for the interior BC, and Okanagan, and then CBC Interior also. So I'll be live with them tomorrow. CBC Vancouver, I'll be live with tomorrow, and CBC Calgary. And then also the Revelstoke Mountaineer is doing a article as well, and then you as well. So that would be everybody.
Thank you. So it really, I think it really left a mark, and it really, yeah, judging, I went through earlier, what did I say? I think there was like 700 plus reactions to that post on our Revelstoke community group page, and over 160 comments. So that's quite a reaction. And reading through them, I think the vast majority of them were very positive and very supportive of what you had said. Have you had any negative feedbacks at all from that?
I haven't had any negative feedback, and I made a joke with my roommate saying that it's probably the first time on Revelstoke community there has been a negative comment on a post.
Yeah, just post a rock. Darn rock. We hate that
Yeah,
rock. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm glad to hear that, and I think it speaks to the choice of words that you had. And while we're on it, I was going to ask you what inspired you to post that and all that, but I think it's very transcendent in what you wrote. So if you would be so kind, actually, would you be willing to read out what that post was for the listeners? This will be going out on audio only as well, on a podcast as well as YouTube. So help them out a little bit with what was posted, especially if they're not a member of the group there.
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. I'm just getting it just so I get all the right words out. Um, yeah. So I started this post with trying to get people's attention by highlighting important. And then I said, as some of you might already know, I would like to share this with everyone. I am COVID-19 positive. And then boom, I said it. I want to share this before it will be shared with to everyone and then kept secret for some reason. I don't personally believe it should be a secret because that creates more fear. My experience so far has been so mild compared to a lot of people who have tested positive, and that I'm thankful for. So damn thankful because this is real. I started to show symptoms on the 22nd with a sore throat, but again, so mild. After that, a couple days later, a dry cough that maybe happened 10 times that day. And the day after that, I had a sore lower back, was very low on energy, and thought that might be PMS. Everything I thought had a valid excuse to it. Little did I know it was COVID. I messaged my boss, told him what was happening, and of course was told to get a test done. I was already off for a couple days prior. As for work questions, anyone can message me. As that day went on, I developed some feverish symptoms. By that, I mean headachy and head cold kind of feelings. I also lost my smell. What I haven't mentioned yet is the mental toll this takes on you. This is so far the worst symptom I've experienced from COVID. Just questions that I thought was, what will people think? My roommates missed opening day in Revelstoke because of me. This is all my fault. I ruined it for everyone I live with. Will people judge me or blame me? I was feeling alienated, feeling rejected, and the stress of anyone you have seen in the last 2 weeks that you could have infected. That one was the worst. I know this is long, but I think it's long overdue that someone talks about it. That I am an individual case. Everyone is unique in their way, and I understand how damn fortunate I am. And the roommates for making me all the food all the time. I'm thankful. No, I'm beyond thankful for my support group, my family, and all of you beautiful people who have reached out to me. I want to spread awareness towards the mental issues this can bring up, and to be the person for anyone to talk to who might be going through the fear and anxiety of this. The shame and guilt needs to stop, as well as hiding the reality. We should be able to talk about this. If anyone who tested positive but scared to let people know, please know it's okay. You're not alone. Thank you so much, whoever read this far. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. And then I said, lots of love. I hope everyone stays safe, remains unpanicked. There's no room for that. We have enough going on. And yeah.
Thank you for that.
No
Yeah,
problem.
is there anything else that, or anything you'd want to stand out, especially, and has that evolved in your mind as well since you first wrote it?
Not necessarily. It's been I've stuck to that the whole time. It also helps me just feel that it's all okay when I say it out loud as well. So I think that what I want to stress is that I am an individual case. This has happened to me in my experience, but it could be so different for someone like you or anyone else. They could go through this in a very different way, and just being able to talk about it, because when we just hear about a case that happened, we don't actually know what's going on, and that just creates more fear for everyone.
Right. And on the backside of that, I'm actually wondering, once you get through this and you're well and you're exposed and you fought off COVID, what happens to all those measures for you? Do you know? Are you immune and unable to transmit the disease, or have you inquired about that, or is there anything official on that? Because I'm kind of wondering. We're just at the start of this, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
I read that there was 46 people confirmed cases in town, which probably means there's about 100 that we don't know, because the doubling rate is once every week or so, right? So this is
And
probably
going
going to
back to
take
the
off,
housing,
right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it will, because a lot of our houses are shared. So it's pretty hard to imagine that it wouldn't take off here.
Yeah.
Just as far as your question when you're asking about what happens after, I've gotten a couple of different answers. So from what I'm told, I'm not supposed to go get a test again because I'm going to be positive for 3 to 6 months. I won't be contagious, but I'll be positive. Mind you, I'm talking to people from Quebec, and apparently in Quebec, what they're doing is you get a test after you've had COVID, and you're only allowed out when you're negative. So it's it's a bit confusing to me. I'm having the person that told me that, to go and double check that she knows what she's talking about. But yeah, it doesn't really make the full amount of sense, because in a way it feels like, well, I've had it, so now I can go out without a mask, and but you can get it again. So that was something that I asked, and yes, you can get it again, the symptoms, and to be able to spread it.
Yeah, but it sounds like you might be protected for some time as well, right? So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, obviously, like measures being mandatory, but it becomes kind of interesting if it does spiral out of control, and in a month or two, we end up with 5,000 out of 8,000 people in town that have gotten it and have gotten through it. Um, what does that look like for measures and stuff? And I was just curious, because we're, as a community, certainly we're still discovering a lot as this disease takes hold, right? And I know other communities might be at a further stage than we are, and maybe we can learn from what's going on there. But um, that being said, um, any protection that we may get from a vaccine would be probably the same kind of protection that we get from getting through the disease naturally as well. So it's kind of hard to say, how do we get out of this as a humanity, right? And how
right.
at what time do we stop treating each other like walking bags of biohazard? Because that really in the short term people can do that, but in the long term that really takes its toll and changes all our relationships. So I don't know if you can have some words of wisdom about that, as you've had days to stay home and maybe ponder things like that more than I have.
I have been pondering, but I don't have any answers, because I can't really get many answers from people. I've been finding that everything that I'm finding online or through nurses have been like quite vague, um, to get through this, because in a perfect world, yeah, we all get sick, and then we all survive, and now we've built antibodies, which is pretty much what the vaccine is trying to do, right? So but that is too risky to do. Um, the COVID has been killing people, and it is a real thing. So, or having long term effects for people. So, it is still a virus that is dangerous. As much as hopefully I'm walking out of here tomorrow with antibodies and protection, that I just hope that everybody else takes it still seriously. And hopefully in the next couple months, if we do that, it can quiet down a bit.
Right. And I guess we're coming to the end here. Do you have any, if we look back, how has your experience changed maybe your aspirations for the future? Where were you at? What were you aspiring to coming into town? You've been here, a few years, and what you're aspiring to, and how's that changed now because of your experience and because of, being fully exposed to what's going on and being a part of it and being a voice for it as well? Has that changed anything for you at this point, or?
Not necessarily. I did have other goals for my career this year. I was hoping to get involved in heli ski lodges and see how that goes, but of course that didn't happen. So it kind of made me hit a quick stop and just sit patiently where I am. But yeah, I don't think it's changed too much. I had a realization like yesterday that COVID is still happening around me, that I'm not done with it. It's not finished. So
Right.
yeah, I hope that helped.
Right. And for myself, we talked about this a little bit before I pressed record there, but I think that there's one takeaway that I would like from our interview here and from people listening to it, is that I mentioned that it reminded me very much, being an older person, reminded me very much when AIDS started spreading, and it spread quite a bit through the gay population, especially in Western states. And then there was kind of like this stigma attached where people would link, uh, homo homosexuality to AIDS, whereas AIDS was not exclusive to homosexuality, but then there was a stigma. And, I think this is where we first heard the term homophobia, because everybody would just link, well, if he's gay, he's diseased, he's dangerous, whatever. And I see some similar things happening with this COVID, where, you see with somebody without a mask for whatever reason, then immediately they're judged, and they may have some good reasons why they're not wearing a mask. Or some people will go to one extreme and start wearing the mask all the time outdoors, even when they're by themselves, and others would take a more casual approach and more directed approach, and then they'd start, there'd be a lot of infighting. And being such a small community, and God knows there's always a lot of infighting within these social media sites, but yeah, if there's one takeaway, that I'm hoping that it won't pit, brother against brother and neighbor against neighbor. Is there a takeaway that you'd like to share? Because there definitely seemed to be something emanating, some wisdom emanating from your original posts, and I want to make sure that gets highlighted within this interview here.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, because that's exactly how I felt when I had it, is almost like I have AIDS, and I don't want to take away from people that have AIDS, but it's just felt like the stigma that just attached onto me now. And now the judgments of other people of why I gave this to myself, and that it's not a choice. And I just really want to let people know that they can talk about it, talk about it out loud, so that other people understand where you're coming from and what your experience is. And it's going to just create a lot more of a casual conversation, not no, not anything to be scared of.
Right. And you I don't think at any time you felt personally like you got this because you did something wrong, more that you were in an area, you're in a style of work that's more exposed, being in the service industry. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would
Okay.
say so.
But there's definitely fear from people that don't know you. Say, well, she got it, she must have done something wrong, she didn't wear her mask, or she didn't social
Was she
distance.
partying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
was she at a party? God, those partiers, like, you know and I see
Yeah.
that, unfortunately, a lot from some of the older crowd. And anybody who knows, your average boomer did a heck of a lot of partying in their 20s. And I don't know
Mhm.
if they've all forgotten that, but uh, let's try to emphasize that it's not, if you catch COVID, it's not something you did wrong, and that's super, super important. um, I'm hoping that we're not going to start dehumanizing ourselves over this, and we get through this together. All right, any final words, Danielle?
No, I think I've said everything I need to share. Just everyone stay safe out there, and it's okay to talk about it.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and keep in touch. Let us know how things go, and maybe we'll do another check-in in a few weeks and see where you're at. And if there's anything you'd want to reach out for from the community, feel free to let me know, or post it. I think you have a very loving community that's really appreciated your wisdom out here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.